What's up, Flick fans? Welcome back to the channel. Finally, the Bikeriders. This movie has been delayed. It shifted studios. It's in theaters this weekend, so let's talk about it.
I'm thinking of starting a riding club.
After a chance encounter, Kathy is drawn to Benny, a member of the Midwestern motorcycle club, the Vandals. As the club transforms into a very dangerous underworld of violence, Benny must choose between Kathy and his loyalty to the Vandals. This film is rated R for language, violence, drug use, brief sexuality, and it's directed by Jeff Nichols. Now, in today's video, we're going to talk non-spoilers almost all the way through, but at the end, I do want to hit on one or two spoilery details, so don't worry. I'll warn you. Liar! I was excited, not only because of Austin Butler, what he's been doing lately, Tom Hardy, Mike Weiss, which is really cool. He's in this film. Challengers, anyone? I love it. But Jodie Comer, she plays Kathy. The film is told through her perspective. She's being interviewed and she's recounting this experience. An experience of a lifetime is what it sounded like at the beginning. But as she recounts both what happened with these bike riders, but also her relationship with Benny, we start to learn what this movie is actually about, or at least it attempts to tell us that, because this movie's about a lot.
Uh-oh.
It's about a lot, yet it gives very little in terms of details and depth. And we're going to start with my ultimate criticism of the Bikeriders. I felt shortchanged by a lot of characters, a lot of moments. Ultimately, I just wanted to know more about everyone. Not only our main trio, but you have Michael Shannon in this movie, Boyd Holbrook in this film, and they serve as serviceable background characters. Yeah, Michael Shannon, he's in the background. I can forgive that because he's got a great relationship with Jeff Nichols. That's why he's in the movie, but I'm like, man, you got Michael Shannon. Let's do something more with him. But back to our main trio, Tom Hardy is giving an awesome performance. This is like vintage Tom Hardy, what we knew from him in the early 2010s. We just haven't had that recently. I'm not hating on Venom, but it's, you know, it's Venom.
What do you mean by that?
He's great, but there are things about his home life that I wanted to know more of. And how this cruise starts is fascinating because the intention wasn't for them to be a biker gang. It wasn't for them to be a threatening presence. It was just a club for people to come who feel like they don't belong. But then members start to show up, and I would include Austin Butler's character in that may have a little more edge, but may also have a little more fight in them.
Little fight in you. I like that.
And there's a moment in the film where everything changes. They go from a club to like this threatening group of people. And that's what I want to talk about in the spoiler section. But that moment really catapulted this movie into what it was and turned our group from a group of people that came together because they had similar interests to a group that was feared and that other people wanted to join but also felt threatened by. And that was my favorite part of the film. While the characters individually lacked depth, this club, known as the Vandals, were fascinating, and it treats the club like a character. So we get depth with what they are all about, with how they progress throughout the movie as an entity, yet individually. It struggles to give us that depth, and a lot of this is because of the way the story is told through Jodie Comer's character, a little bit of voiceover there. Now, she's quirky. She's got a little bit of an accent. And if you guys watch and listen to our podcast, Movie Mode, Ryan and I are going to talk about this film in even more detail. And we disagreed on her, not her performance, but just kind of the accent and what her character was and represented in the movie. It wasn't a full disagreement because I can see that criticism. It didn't bother me as much. What bothered me was the decision to tell the story how they told it. And I understand it's based on a true story, so you can't or don't want to fabricate reality too much. That's a very ungrounded thing to do in a grounded movie, and it's based on these interviews in real life, and that's what they're doing in the film. So they were kind of pigeonholed. They almost had to do it this way, but it didn't really serve our bike riders individually well. And I think the character that is the most shortchanged in this film is Austin Butler as Benny. He is not on screen all that much in this movie. There are large chunks where he's just not there altogether. Now, it makes sense narratively, but as a movie that leans on this relationship between those two and the romance that they have, the spark in the beginning was great. While not as sexy as some of the early word of mouth made it out to be, they're like, oh my God, Austin Butler's so hot. Yeah, that's the only scene where that happens. And then we don't get much else after that. And then they never really explore their relationship together on screen very much again, and every time we see them, they are in a disagreement. And so I felt as if we could have had more time spent with them actually loving each other and actually getting some of those emotions as opposed to just anger and that feeling of being threatened and being unsure of yourself. And I really wanted more from that relationship. And that was my least interesting part of the movie when it should have been the most interesting part.
That's too damn bad!
Now, again, when they're all together on screen, some of those moments where they're just hanging out and you're getting to know them, they're getting to know each other, that was awesome. If you're into a show like Sons of Anarchy, I mean, it's an easy comparison. Everyone's going to say that. I do think you will enjoy a lot of elements of this movie, and the time period, it looks good. It feels like you're watching something from that time. It has a great, distinct style to it. That's something that Jeff Nichols always does well, and it carries over here. I absolutely loved looking at this movie. It's a beautiful film to look at with the cinematography and some things that kick in the background, the technical elements, and so all of that works. And the overarching narrative is interesting, how they come about, how they come to be, and how that escalates into something further. Now, spoiler alert, there are two things I want to mention. The moment that I was speaking of earlier is when they make the decision to burn down this guy's bar. And you can say, well, it wasn't even that guy that messed with him. It was two other guys. But what I believe Hardy's character was doing in that moment was making a statement. And Ryan, my podcast co-host, pushed back on that. He said it just felt like something very out of character and almost random. I can see that. I understand that perspective. I believe he felt he had to make that decision in that moment to get people to take them seriously. We are no longer just a club. We are a threatening entity. And you see that pay off as the firefighters, policemen, whoever were next to him, weren't doing anything about it. They were just kind of standing there looking at him, and they tell him, they say, yeah, I think they're scared of us. And that's the moment where they went from one thing, turned into another, and as it gets bigger and more people join, it starts to escalate, and it becomes something else in its entirety. It goes from having some fun with some bros to drugs and violence and all of those horrific things you expected it to be to start with. And so that decision was fascinating. Then you have some of the character deaths, and Butler's character goes off for a big portion of the film, comes back. They ultimately go to Florida and do what they said they were going to do. Hardy's character just kind of gets shot, and that was a fascinating escalation, and that was the moment where I really started to learn more about him when he goes and says goodbye to Comer's character and goes and has a conversation with his wife. It's like, I think he knows what he's in for. He knows that all of this is going to come back to bite him, and so I found that to be a nice resolve for his character, a shocking one, a terrible one, but one that made a lot of sense in the world that they're living in. Before I give you my score, if you like this review, dropping that thumbs up would be great. And check out my podcast, Movie Mode, where we have an extensive talk about Bikeriders this weekend. And the Bikeriders isn't quite the ride that it intends to be, but there's a lot to appreciate here, especially if you find yourself invested in the Vandals and their rowdiness. Hardy and Butler are great, but their characters needed a bit more depth. Nichols' style and gritty feel to this grounded story is excellent, and while it falls short of its potential, there will be a lot to like for fans of this type of movie. I can see reactions being across the board. Some people will say it's boring. Some people will say I wasn't invested. Others will say it was a good grounded time, and I like Venom on a motorcycle. So please let me know if that's how you feel. All right, see you soon.